Welcome to this tutorial on using the BrilliantImagery time-lapse software. For this tutorial, I'm going to assume that you've already imported your images and converted them to DNG files. I'm also going to assume that you've already downloaded the BrilliantImagery app from the website. I'll include a link to the download page in the video description. Okay, to get started, let's take a look at the app itself first. When you open it up, you'll initially see this black console window. Don't worry about this, you don't actually need to use it. It'll just show some output information that might be helpful, but you don't really need to actually interact with it. And then here is the BrilliantImagery app itself. So this first tab that it opens up to is the one that you will be predominantly interacting with. It's the one that you actually use to edit your time-lapse videos. This second render tab is predominantly just for testing to make sure that images are rendering properly. So if we take a look, we can open up a random picture and it will slowly render and then display on the screen. I did just skip ahead there because this computer is pretty slow, but now you can see the image has loaded. In this window you can scroll around to see the image. You'll notice that the color temperature is kind of weird and the exposure isn't set right. That's just because this isn't really a full render of the image. It's more just a preview of the raw information. But with this, we can see that there's no weird patterns or anything, so we can tell that it is properly rendering. So we will be able to align these images and use these images to adjust exposure. Now, if we go back to the Ramp and Stabilize tab, you'll be able to see the workflow for which you presumably came here. To get started on that workflow, I'm going to head over to Lightroom and take it from there. Here you can see the image sequence that we'll be using. I'd also just like to point out that my goal here isn't to make the prettiest time-lapse I can, so much as just to show how the workflow works and to show what happens. Now the way this works is that we will edit a few photos out of the collection of photos, and then the software will just figure out what all the other photos have to be edited to in order to get nice smooth lighting transitions and also nice stable sequences. So in order to do that, what we need to do is mark the photos that we want to use as our reference frames, and we also just need to edit those reference frames to look how we want them to look. This being a short example sequence, I'm going to kind of just randomly pick a few images to be reference frames. On the other hand, if you're working with a large sequence, you kind of have to use a little bit of judgment to decide which ones are the most relevant regarding lighting transitions and things of that nature. All that said, I'm going to go to the first image and start editing it. In order to tell BrilliantImagery that this is going to be used as a keyframe, I'm going to start by rating this picture with 3 stars. Okay, so now I'm going to edit the video, and again, I'm not going for the prettiest picture I can make. I'm just going to do something just so we can make some adjustments. Here's my edited photo. I know it looks pretty silly, but with settings like these, it'll be pretty apparent when they change. It's worth noting that anything that you do want to be ramped, you do have to adjust. With color temp and tint in particular, it's easy to just look at them, say, oh, they're changed between pictures, so that'll be fine. I don't need to adjust them, but you do have to adjust them at least a little bit. Otherwise, it might think that one of them is in the default setting and it doesn't save defaults, so things that aren't saved can't be updated. Similarly, if you want to stabilize a shaky image sequence, you do have to crop it. So I did do that here. Now let's head back to the full image sequence and keep this process moving. At this point, I'm going to copy all the edits I made and paste them into all the other images. What I typically do is try to find a picture that doesn't really look right, for which the edits that I just pasted don't work. So then I go into that picture and I edit that one as my next keyframe. That said, since this image sequence is so short, I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily pick one. So this one looks good to me. This one we will edit next. We're going to follow a similar process to last time. I'm just going to start by rating the picture 3 stars, and now I'm going to do some more editing. Okay, here's my resulting picture. Again, it's pretty silly looking, but it'll be dramatic once we do all of the ramping. I'm going to head back over to the main image sequence and take it from there. Okay, so we're going to do the same basic thing as last time. I'm going to copy all of my settings, and now I'm just going to select the images in the sequence, or I should say the remainder of the images in the sequence, and paste those settings in. And this part should seem familiar again. I'm just going to go back into now what for me will be my last image, what for you might just be your third of many keyframes. And again, I'm going to rate it 3 stars and then do some more editing. I suppose this is probably the least ridiculous picture of them all. Now that we're done editing all of our keyframes, we're going to go back to the main image sequence and take it from there. Next, we want to hit Control A to highlight all of the images. Right click on one, metadata, save metadata to files. We want to do that. And we're letting it save there. Now is our last step before heading over to the BrilliantImagery app. We just need to update a reference image. So I'm selecting the first image and then update DNG preview and metadata. This is updating the thumbnail within the image, and the thumbnail is what we're going to use in a moment to reference what part of the image we want to edit. Here I'll select the folder where our image sequence is. Right now it's reading all of the images in, figuring out the order that they belong in, and loading our little reference image. We need to pick which part of the image we want to reference when we're actually stabilizing and ramping and doing all of that stuff. When we're doing this, a few things to think about are that we will be referencing this area when we're setting the brightness of each picture. So if you pick an area that has dramatically changing lighting, maybe that'll lead to the look you're going for, or maybe you really want to avoid that. Another thing to think about is that this will also be used for stabilizing the image sequence. So if you pick an area that's too noisy or has too low of contrast, that won't necessarily work well. So things like grass can give you trouble, things like trees, if it's basically just digital noise, that can give you trouble. Also, obviously, if you have things like the sky in the background, then if it's just blue, that doesn't really work. And if you have moving clouds, then that's also not helpful. That said, what we have here, if we have a combination of treetops and some of the structures in the granite, then we should be able to use that with some success. In order to select the area, you just want to click twice, you get your little box that tells you where you're going to use. If you don't like the box, you can just click again and it'll remove the box, and then you can do something a little different. When you're selecting the box, just keep in mind that the larger area you select, the longer it'll take to render, and that's relevant if you're either stabilizing or ramping the exposure. But also, if you select too small of an area, then you won't have as much information to go by when you're stabilizing. So I'm just going to go back and do something about like this. That'll be fine. Now we just say, what do we want to do? I'm just going to say I want to ramp everything. I want to stabilize it. I don't think this sequence is actually shaky, but that's not really here or there for the sake of this discussion. And last but not least, there is a checkbox that you can check if you want a message box to pop up when it's done editing. That can be nice in case you step away from your computer. You'll get a little chime to hopefully let you know that it's done running, and you can come back and continue on with the process. Since everything looks good, I'm going to hit the process button. This will take a little bit, especially on this computer, so I'm going to do some fast forwarding, and then once it's done, we'll pick back up. Also, it's worth noting at this point, since the software is still pretty early on in certain regards, the user interface will actually freeze up. This is normal. Yeah, someday it'll be different, just isn't different yet. Switching back over, you can see here on the little console window that opened up when we initially opened the app, you can see your update. So you don't need to use this, but you can check back and just see the status of how things are going. And now it's done. I'll click back over, all done. And so now I can head back over to Lightroom. From here, we'll kind of reverse the earlier procedure. So I will select everything, right-click, metadata, read metadata from files. And once this reads in, you can see the preview starting to update. And so you can see there, now we have a stabilized and ramped image. This picture right here looks funny. My suspicion is that one's just not updating properly. But there you go. That is the workflow for using the BrilliantImagery app. I hope it works well for you. Please reach out if you have questions or concerns. Thanks and have a nice day.